As the Raiders continue their search for their next head football coach, the list of potential prospects continues to grow. We'll break that down and more on Tuesday's edition of the Locked On Raiders podcast for January 14th, 2025.
You are Locked On Raiders, your daily Las Vegas Raiders podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome here, Raider Nation, to another edition of the Locked On Raiders podcast. Thank you so much for making the show your first listen of the day. We definitely appreciate you, whether you catch us wherever you find your favorite podcast or if you're checking us out on the YouTube page. We appreciate it either way. The show continues to grow each and every day, and that's because of your support. And if you're checking us out on the YouTube page, that's because of my man, Ari, who does a fantastic job behind the scenes, making sure we're looking good and sounding good. We definitely appreciate him. We shout him out. He works very hard. He's on Twitter at Ari Produces. You can hit me up as well, as many of you do, at your boy Q254. And if you want to be a part of the show, as many of you are, 707-654-4693. That's the Locked On Raider podcast voicemail line. As a matter of fact, we'll close out the show today as we normally do with your calls and texts. Plenty of feedback that we got to get to, and we'll do that coming up. Segment number 3. Segment number 2, we'll talk about the potential head coach candidate that was in with the Raiders on Monday. That's head coach Pete Carroll, formerly of the Seattle Seahawks, met with the Raiders on Monday. So what does he bring to the table? We heard from his former player, and Richard Sherman, multiple times, but someone that covered Pete Carroll, knows the good, the bad, ugly, whatever the case may be. Stacey Joe Ross, she joined my radio show on Monday and had some really good breakdowns about Pete Carroll, kind of taking you behind the scenes to let you know everything that you need to know about the potential head football coach. You'll hear that coming up in segment number 2 of today's Locked On Raiders podcast. Here in segment number 1, just news and notes of the day, really just getting you up to speed on all things you need to know when it comes to the silver and black. We'll jump right into it after I tell you about the title sponsor of the show, which is Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, use promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. So, off top, let's go ahead and just go over the current job openings in the National Football League. And you're probably saying, well, why are you doing that, Q? Well, because as of Monday, a new job became available. It's like as soon as one door closed, another door opened up. The Patriots, we know they're signed, sealed, and delivered with Mike Vrabel. That was the biggest obvious that was going to happen in the league. Matter of fact, he had his introductory press conference on Monday. So that's done. You can wipe the Patriots off the list. But the Dallas Cowboys have now opened up. On Monday, found out that Mike McCarthy and Jerry Jones were not going to continue moving forward with a potential contract extension, which is what I thought was going to happen. It's funny how things change. At the beginning of the year, I thought there was no way Mike McCarthy would finish the season out and come back the next year. Then as the season got going and got underway and got wrapped up, I thought, okay, Mike McCarthy, it's no doubt he's going to head back to Dallas. But in typical Jerry Jones way, he takes his time, he drags his feet, and then he decides, yeah, this is not going to happen. We're not going to bring you back, and they're going to move on. So now the Cowboys are kind of scrambling to talk to potential candidates only because, well, the guys that they could talk to, like what the Raiders are talking to by way of Zoom that are current coaches in the league that are coaching in the playoffs, basically they're going to have to wait till their run is over now once the playoffs are over and the Super Bowl. So they're only going to be able to talk to people that aren't currently employed in the National Football League, which is funny. We found out over the weekend about Deion Sanders and his thoughts and his desire to be in the mix when it comes to the Raiders head coach, and the fact that the Raiders did not want Deion. That's something that I discussed at my barbershop on Saturday. Found out that Deion's people were making calls to the Raiders saying that he would like to be there. Obviously, he wants to coach his sons, Shador and Shiloh, and the Raiders aren't interested, which is great. But I also said on Monday's show, it's a very Jerry Jones and Cowboys type thing to do. Well, lo and behold, late on Monday night, Adam Schefter, Ian Rappaport, Jordan Schultz, everyone who covers the National Football League put out the notice that Deion Sanders and Jerry Jones have had conversations about him being the next head football coach there in Big D. So not a surprise by me. I don't know how they'd get in position to go and draft Shador and Shiloh. Shiloh's easy to get, but how are you going to get Shador? I don't really know, but I'm sure that, if they really are serious about Deion, which it sounds like they are, that they'll find a way to get Shador, and probably Dak Prescott will be on the way out, and somebody will have an opportunity to pick up that quarterback. But the Cowboys are open, the Jets are open, Bears, Saints, Jaguars, and obviously the Raiders as well. And we'll hear about the guy who visited with the Raiders on Monday, Pete Carroll, coming up in segment number 2. I love what the Raiders are doing. I love the fact that they're not leaving any stone unturned. I love that they're talking to many different people, and they've added some to the list as well. We know they talked to Ben Johnson, the offensive coordinator from the Lions. We know they talked to Aaron Glenn, the defensive coordinator from the Lions. They talked to Steve Spagnuolo, the defensive coordinator from the Chiefs, and they talked to Pete Carroll on Monday. On Thursday, they're going to have in Robert Saleh, the former head coach of the Jets and defensive coordinator of the 49ers and other teams, and was very successful there. Also, they put in a request for Denver Bronco defensive coordinator Vance Joseph. And a lot of people probably remember him as a head coach before when he was there in Denver and it didn't go very well. Well, he orchestrated a really good defense. He did a really good job. Part of the reason why the Broncos won the games that they won, 10 games and getting to the playoffs, is because of that defense. And now there's interest out there. I love the fact that the Raiders are just going to bring him in and at least talk to him. And again, like many others, I hate when the first thing I see when I see Vance Joseph got a request was, oh, he's just a Rooney Rule guy. I don't have to go into that conversation. Everyone knows how I feel about that. I hate it, but that's just kind of the climate that we're in, and that's what it is, and that's why they need to fix that rule so it's not just checking a box. But that's neither here nor there. They have asked Vance Joseph to come in, and he's supposed to be meeting with the Raiders either on Thursday or Friday for their open head coaching job as well. They do have, the guys that are leaders in the clubhouse. Ben Johnson is the guy that they're hot and heavy after. I think everyone knows that. I think a lot of people are excited by that. He obviously brings a lot of juice by what he's able to do with the Lions offense there in Detroit. You do have to be patient with him because, again, he's never been a head coach, so it's going to be a learning curve. If they do bring in Ben Johnson, I really hope they bring in a very, very much veteran defensive coordinator like a Robert Saleh or someone like that can do some really good things and really let him focus on the offense while that defensive coordinator handles his business. So Todd Monken's the other guy that they've requested, but it's still TBD on if or when he's going to come in for an interview. There's been no updates on Todd Monken, the current Ravens offensive coordinator, and obviously they have a really big game coming up this upcoming weekend against the Buffalo Bills. Finally, here in segment number 1, news and notes of the day. A lot of people have been asking me about assistant GM Champ Kelly. What's going on with him? I talked about it on Monday's show that his contract rolled over into the 2025 year, so he's under contract. And thanks to AFL Godfather on Twitter, tweeted out on Monday, Champ Kelly is handling all the business during the transition. So the assistant GM, while the Raiders don't have a GM or head coach, is handling the business, like signing linebacker Jackson Mitchell to a reserve future contract. That's what they did on Monday. There's been other reserve future contracts that they've signed, and he's going to be handling all the business. Saw a lot of people tweet out, like, who's doing this without a GM? Champ Kelly's in the building. He's under contract to be in the building at least through 2025. You know how things could change based off maybe who comes in, whether it's Ben Johnson and his people, Pete Carroll and his people, or other and their people. They might not want Champ Kelly in the building, but that's as of right now. He's under contract through 2025 with the Silver and Black. And as I mentioned multiple times, not only just recently, but in the past, Champ Kelly is a guy that I do believe will be a GM someday of a team. I don't think it's going to end up being with the Raiders. If he was going to be with the Raiders, it probably would have already happened when Antonio Pierce was named the head coach. But Champ Kelly is taking care of business as the assistant GM, the acting GM, while the Raiders don't have one in the building. But what do you need to know about the latest guy that met with the Raiders on Monday for their head coaching job, Pete Carroll? Well, you hear from Stacey Joe Ross from Seattle Sports, does a fantastic job covering the Seahawks and everything Seattle, and has some really great breakdowns about Pete Carroll on my radio show on Monday. You'll hear that coming up in segment number 2 of today's Locked On Raiders podcast. Before we get to that, though, I do want to tell you about a great sponsor here on the Locked On Raiders podcast, and that is Intuit TurboTax. Taxes was waiting and wondering and worrying if you were going to get any money back. And then waiting, wondering, and worrying some more. Right? Now Taxes is matching with a TurboTax expert who can do your taxes as soon as today. An expert who gives your taxes their undivided attention as they work on your return while you get real-time updates on their progress so you can focus on your day. An expert who will find your every deduction possible and file every form, every investment, every little thing with 100% accuracy. Also, you can get the most money back guaranteed. No waiting, no wondering, no worries. Now, this is Taxes. Get an expert now on TurboTax.com. Only available with TurboTax Live full service, real-time updates only in iOS mobile app. See guarantee details at TurboTax.com/guarantees. All right, Raider Nation, here we go. Segment number 2 of today's Locked On Raiders podcast. What do you need to know about former Seahawks head football coach Pete Carroll? We know he's a ball of energy. We know that, yeah, he might be 73 years old, but he's probably got more energy than I do. He chews a lot of gum. He knows how to build a team. You've seen the culture. He's won in college at USC, won a Super Bowl in Seattle. We know all that. So there's good that goes with Pete Carroll, and there's bad that goes with Pete Carroll, right? If everything was sunshine and rainbows, he'd probably still be the head coach there in Seattle. So I had someone hit me up on Twitter on Monday, and I thought it was really cool, saying, wait a minute, if Pete's so great, why did Seattle move on from him? So that question will be answered here in segment number 2 of today's Locked On Raiders podcast. Stacey Jo Ross, she does a fantastic job with Seattle sports. She's part of ESPN as well. Been rocking with her for a very long time. Very informative and knowledgeable about everything, well, that you ask her about. And so, of course, when it came to Pete Carroll meeting with the Raiders, the first person I wanted to reach out to was her to get a little bit of more information. Now, we heard from Richard Sherman, played that multiple times here on the show, what he does. And obviously, Richard Sherman won the Super Bowl there with him. But what else can we say about Pete Carroll? So Stacey Jo Ross, she joined my radio show on Monday. I just brought a couple sound bites from that conversation to the podcast. And the first one is just on how she feels like Coach Carroll, would he love the opportunity to coach and try to build? Because I call him Bob the Builder. He's a builder. How much would he love the opportunity to try to build the program that is the Raiders?
I think so. Look, I think what Pete loved most was the earlier years of his career. And it's not just because they had like Richard Sherman for free, basically. Yeah, I would also love coaching up the Legion of Boom. Sign me up.
Right.
But I think it's also that the thing he loved most was developing a program. And the thing he loved most was nurturing guys and helping them tap into their best selves, encouraging them to be confident. I mean, he is a big part. He does not get credited enough for what we saw from Geno Smith and Geno's comeback year. He had a huge hand in just building up confidence, being by his side, really advocating for him. I think that people think that's just coach speak and that it's just kind of, it doesn't mean anything. It absolutely does. Every single player I know remembers his favorite coaches, and Pete Carroll is that guy for a lot of former NFL players. So I don't know how it's going to turn out. Let's say he goes to the Raiders. I don't know how it turns out long term. I don't know if he brings them to a Super Bowl, but I will promise you that he is one of the best candidates to just build up a culture.
Kind of one of those guys that just, I call Matt Rule that as well as far as college goes. Bob the Builder, right? He goes somewhere, he builds up the program, and then he eventually leaves. We saw what he did at USC. We saw what he was able to do in Seattle, and eventually, well, he just runs out. But he had a long run there in Seattle to the point where when the upper management and ownership decided to move on from him as far as being the head coach and just putting him in a senior advisory role, it's like, wait, what? Pete Carroll? You moved on. You took him off the sideline. So obviously everything wasn't, sunshine and rainbows and puppy dogs. But Pete Carroll has a track record of been there, done that, which is something that I think is important for the Raiders moving forward because they need someone with some kind of experience. Now, if you're not going to get someone experience, I've said it before, you've got to be able to give them time. Give them a little bit of, room to grow and also room to trip up. They're going to make a few mistakes along the road, but you have to allow them you have to have that patience to allow them to grow. Also, when it comes to Pete Carroll, many people have pointed this out off the Locked On Raider podcast voicemail line. Look, the division's got Andy Reid, the division's got Sean Payton, and the division has got Jim Harbaugh. And obviously, Pete Carroll has a history with Jim Harbaugh as they were both in the NFC West together. So here's Stacey Jo on how she thinks that Pete would be in the division with those three characters, especially Jim Harbaugh.
God, I mean, he's already going up against Harbaugh twice a year during the height of the Seahawks, right? And typically got the better of those battles. I mean, this is a guy, I think that I think people started to write Pete off in a division with 30-something and 40-something-year-old head coaches going, oh, he's too old. He just doesn't get it. I don't think there's anything about football Pete doesn't get. Now, the one question I would have as a Raiders fan, if it were me, the one question I would have is, why did the Seahawks run defense flounder for 2 consecutive seasons under Pete and in one season go from 31st to 16th under Mike McDonald? Like, that's the area where if I were a Raiders fan, I'd go, all right, what wasn't clicking here? Other than that, like, Pete understands football. There's not things that are lost on him. So I think that, he's embraced those challenges before. He knows those coaches well. And one thing that I think is important is those coaches all have respect for Pete Carroll. And I just want to add on that Pete was, towards the end of his tenure, I don't want to say made fun of, but maybe written off a little bit for having kind of a simplistic view about football. Run the ball, win time of possession, compete every day. And I think people thought that coaching football must certainly be more complicated than that. One thing that really struck me at the end of Mike McDonald's first year is that he was asked what he learned most in his first year as head coach, and he said that football's more simple than I thought, there are fewer rules that I need to think about, but the things that matter most are actually way more important than I realized. That sounds convoluted, but what I'm saying is I felt like it was kind of validation for Pete Carroll in a weird way.
Stacey Joe Ross right there again talking about, going up in the division with those coaches. And as we had people call in and text in, he could see eye to eye with Andy Reid. He could see eye to eye with Sean Payton. He's already got the rivalry with Jim Harbaugh. So he's not going to be intimidated. He's not going to back down. They respect him. He's got respect for them. But he's going to also have his team prepared and ready to go each and every week to take on that division. And that is an absolute gauntlet. There's no doubt about that. That is the AFC West. So things sound good when it comes to Pete Carroll, right? We feel pretty good. I feel like he's, the guy. If Ben Johnson doesn't take the job, I feel like Pete Carroll is going to get the job. One of the two guys, right? If it's not Ben Johnson, it's going to be Pete Carroll. And honestly, with me, and now that the Cowboys job is open, if they don't go get Deion, is that somewhere where Ben Johnson might be interested in going, right? Could Jerry Jones find a way to lure him to Big D? I mean, that has another opening now. So that's also something to pay attention to. I think that Jerry's going to end up going big game hunting and big name hunting, and rather have Deion Sanders, who's very unproven, right? All he's been able to do is in college ranks. Doesn't mean that he's going to succeed in the NFL. And really, I'm glad that the Raiders have already let it be known that they're not interested in that. I think they're interested in his son, but not interested in him. But we'll see what happens. That's a whole nother scenario. So for Pete, what went wrong in Seattle? And I love the fact that I asked this question on my radio show, because Stacey Joe Ross gave a very detailed answer on what she believed went wrong for Pete Carroll as the head football coach of the Seattle Seahawks.
Ultimately, the thing with what happened at the end of Pete Carroll's tenure is partly on Pete, and it's partly on just the nature of the NFL, in my opinion. We have seen a lot of great head coaches reach the end of their careers, usually with a certain team, and more often than not, it's because they've stopped winning, and more often than not, they've stopped winning not only because of philosophy or maybe tensions within a team, but because of roster. And I think that what happened with Pete Carroll is that his roster just was not as good, and that sounds like an excuse, and, it is a little bit because Mike McDonald also just won 10 games with that roster. But that is a roster that used to have lots of blue-chip talent, plenty of all-pros, plenty of Pro Bowlers. The Seahawks had no all-pros this year. They had one Pro Bowler this year. Granted, Leonard Williams should have been another, but this is not a roster loaded with talent. They have, in my opinion, one of the worst offensive lines in football. That was the case last year. And if you look at those offensive stats in terms of rushing yards per game, rushing attempts per game, the narrative this year was, they really got away from the run. They really struggled with it last year, too. A lot of the offensive problems with penalties, persisted under a new head coach, who I think is great. I really, really like Mike McDonald, and I'm curious to see what he does. So part of what happened is you win 10 games a season, you don't get pick number 3 overall. And so you don't get a chance to maybe find your quarterback of the future, find your franchise-altering edge rusher or your franchise-altering left tackle. So that's one issue. Now, they still had a good team. I'm not about to point at this team and say, Pete Carroll was working with nothing. No, you still got some pieces, including last year when he had number 5 overall pick Devin Witherspoon, number 9 overall pick Charles Cross. So now we're getting into the philosophy and what about Pete wasn't working? And this is rumor, and this is stuff people talk about. And so I don't know that this is definitively the answer, but one of the things I've always heard is that Pete is an exceptionally loyal person, and that maybe part of what broke down was that he hung on to a lot of the same people for too long. That can be players. It can be assistant coaches. So one of the issues was, there's a message that's not getting across. Pete's got this great message. Everyone believes in the message. Why isn't it resonating with every player? Why aren't, concepts about stopping the run? Why isn't that filtering through? And in my opinion, based on only things I've heard, it sounds like maybe part of it was the people communicating the message between Pete and the players. Again, I think that there were more than just those issues at hand, but I think that when you're a head coach for a really long time, I'm talking 10 plus years, you do have to shake it up once in a while, whether it's with personnel, coaches, not your philosophy, but maybe your approach to certain things. I think to the extent that Pete tried to switch his defense, for instance, from a 4-3 to a 3-4, was an attempt to do that, but I don't think it was the evolution and the innovation that someone like John Schneider or current chairwoman Jody Allen wanted to see in a division that has Sean McVay and Kyle Shanahan. Like, that's pretty hard to compete with what you're seeing from those guys offensively. So I think they brought in a young guy and they thought, like, he's going to innovate, he's going to elevate us in a way that maybe just, fresh eyes bring. But in terms of building a culture, I was so excited when I heard that Pete was being connected to the Raiders, because in terms of building a culture and the fundamental just pillars of a program, he's always been right.
Thought that was some great stuff. I mean, we talked for about 15 or 16 minutes, but that detailed answer right there was fantastic. Really, I mean, just kind of goes through the ups and downs, the ebbs and flows. And, you heard her earlier talking about football being simple, and that's kind of, people were making fun of Pete for his beliefs. And then their new head coach, Mike McDonald, kind of said that football's not as complicated as we thought it was, or I thought it was. And, so there's some things to like, but there's also some things to question there, right? And does that jive with what the Raiders are trying to do? The other thing I have, and really didn't get into it with Stacey because she would have no way of knowing this, how does what Pete Carroll, his beliefs and the fact that he's a control freak and really does want to have, total control. Even in Seattle, I know John Schneider was the GM, but really Pete Carroll had his thumbprint on everything, personnel, everything. And as you heard Stacey say, a little bit too loyal, right? So how would that jive with what Tom Brady was trying to put in place? Like, that's one of the big questions, because again, this is the Tom Brady show. And he's going to build it like he sees fit. Is it something where Tom Brady says, okay, well, Pete Carroll's been there, done that, I'll defer to him and I'll just listen to what he has to say? Or does he have in his mind how he thinks that this thing should look and sound and everything, and then want to do it his way and hope that Pete Carroll is able to adapt to what he wants, right? What's the middle even there? That's a question that I don't think anybody can answer until we see it, until we see who the Raiders hire and see how it's all put together. And from everything I'm understanding and from everything that I've been told from people that are on the record and off the record, is that Ben Johnson is numero uno when it comes to the Raiders' choice, and to the fact that they're willing to just about do anything to roll out the red carpet and get him to be the head football coach of the team. Like, if they could offer him the job right now, I think they would, right? They technically can't, right? Right now they can't do that, but if they could, they would. Let's put it like, that's how much they're hot and bothered by Ben Johnson and want him to be the head football coach. And the good thing about that, even though he's not experienced, is that you are committing to allowing him to build the program in his image, right? And, of course, obviously with the help of Tom Brady, but with Tom Brady being the heavy influence that even got him to interview with the Raiders, to me it makes it feel like they would be able to collaborate a lot easier. One, Ben Johnson's never done it. He'll obviously have a heavy say in it, and then Tom Brady will also bring some ideas of what he's heard from people like Bill Belichick and other ones that he's talked to. But since he's the one that's like doing all the heavy lifting, and oh, by the way, he's on the call this weekend for the Lions, the divisional game. And guess who's on the call? Tom Brady, right? So, if there's anybody who can talk to Ben Johnson this weekend, it'll be Tom Brady. I don't know exactly how he's going to do it. I'm sure all eyes will be on him to make sure that he's not tampering or whatever the case may be, but I'm sure he'll find a way to get it done one way or the other. So we'll see. But that's all you needed to know about Pete Carroll. Thought that was great breakdowns from Stacey Joe Ross, again, from Seattle Sports and ESPN, talking all things Pete Carroll. And now we'll wait. Again, later on this week, Robert Saleh is supposed to come in on Thursday, and Vance Joseph of the Broncos is supposed to come in on either Thursday or Friday and meet with the Raiders. So any updates that I get from that, of course, I'll bring it to the table. But want to hear from you next at 707-654-4693. Your calls and texts will close out the show on today's edition of the Locked On Raiders podcast. Before we get to that, though, I do want to tell you about another great sponsor here on the show, and that is Gametime. If you know me by now, you know I love going to live events, whether it's sports, music, theater, comedy, whatever the case may be, all the different shows, all the different activities. If it's out and about and it's live, sign me up. Gametime has made it even easier to get tickets for your favorite events with their new feature, Gametime Picks. The feature filters out all the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats. You don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets, so you can go and look for whatever you want, whenever you want, and get them, and it'll be all 100% focused on what you need. Right now, take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the app, create an account, use promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms do apply. Again, create the account, download the app, Gametime app, create that account, use the promo code LOCKEDONNFL, LOCKEDON NFL for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Everybody say it together with me. What time is it? Gametime? My mom likes when I say it like that. Here we go, Raider Nation. Segment number 3 of today's Locked On Raiders podcast. Your calls and texts straight off that Locked On Raider podcast voicemail line, 707-654-4693. Let's start off with a text from Mike from Texas Hill Country. Say, Q, Mike from Texas Hill Country, your caller is confusing you with the Vegas Nation podcast. Host kept calling out people who called for AP last year and then switched to fire him. You have not done that. By the way, your show is way better. That's Mike from Texas Hill Country. Thanks, Mike, for the text. I do appreciate that. And the clarification. He's talking about Raider Eddie in Denver, who was very critical about, well, just about anything I do on the show, which is fine. That's his opinion. But basically was referring to me and saying that I was calling people out for changing their mind on if they supported Antonio Pierce or not. And I never have done that. I will never. I mean, who the hell am I to tell you what to choose and what not to choose, or what to support or what not to support? You can change your mind. Hell, I've changed my mind, right? I was ho-hum on Pete Carroll. And then after, doing some research and talking to people and thinking about it a little bit more, it's like, well, you know what? That was probably a knee-jerk reaction. Pete Carroll wouldn't be so bad after all. So I would never tell you you can't change your mind. Only thing I will ever say is I pounded the table for Antonio Pierce to get the head coaching job about 3 weeks into him being an interim, and that's against my better judgment. I never, say that the interim should get hired because they're the interim for a reason, but I did with Antonio Pierce, and I wasn't going to switch things up after that. I was going to ride with him until, the Raiders moved on from him, and they did, right? A week ago now today, they've moved on from him. So we move on, and I've moved on. I'm not singing the blues about AP or how he was done wrong, and I'm not doing any of that. That's not what I do, right? I mean, it doesn't do you any good. It sure doesn't do me any good. So thanks for the clarification. I did not know where that came from, but it sounds like Raider Eddie is getting some of his shows confused, which is, again, what I said to him on Monday's show. If you're going to quote me, just quote me correctly. That's all I ask for. Thanks so much for the text. I do appreciate you. Up next, got a call from Cheese Grater Raider. He's calling to talk about Ben Johnson and what he believes he brings to the table. Here he is, Cheese Grater Raider.
Hey, what's going on, Q? What's going on, Raider Nation? It's the Cheese Grater Raider. And I'm calling to talk about Ben Johnson, and I hope we get him. And look at the job he's done with the Detroit Lions. What are they? They're front runners for the Super Bowl, at least to appear. They're front runners, and I'll tell you, they have, in my opinion, everything except an elite quarterback. If you were to, if you were to put Ben Johnson on our team, I think we can skate by now. I think with a different quarterback besides Aiden O'Connell. I just don't think Aiden O'Connell is the answer. But I think we can get by with a good quarterback, not great, with a good quarterback if we fill our roster. And we have a good roster. We were just injured. Make note of that. If we go into this draft, say we draft somebody like him, Ashton Gentry, if he comes to us, we can't get a quarterback, we get Ashton Gentry. Then we go and we get in free agency, maybe there's a stud receiver we can grab. I think our defense is solid. It's just unhealthy. But I think we just need a couple pieces on offense, a couple pieces on defense, a good quarterback, not great, and Ben Johnson. And I think we can turn this ship around. Let me know what you think, Q. Go Raiders.
Cheese Grater, thanks so much for the call. Appreciate you. How'd you get your name, by the way? I don't know if I ever asked you that. I know you've been rocking with the show for a long time, but I don't know how you got your name. But really cool. I do like it. As far as Ben Johnson goes, clearly he's got the most out of the Lions offense for sure, right? Goff is a really good quarterback. There's a reason why he was selected number 1 overall by the Rams at the time. But the good thing about Goff, and when you look at Aiden O'Connell, neither one of those guys are runners. And Ben Johnson has found a way to get the most out of Jared Goff and have him be very successful in that Lions offense. So if the Raiders aren't able to get a quarterback, or if they do get a quarterback and they decide that they don't want to start a rookie, which I know Tom Brady is not in favor of starting a rookie, I feel confident that Aiden O'Connell can start and be that bridge quarterback and just kind of be that guy, because he does have a similar skill set to Goff as far as not being a mobile quarterback. He can sit in the pocket, and Ben Johnson could design ways to get the ball to the playmakers, even though he's in the pocket and not really moving around. So thanks so much for that call. I do appreciate you. Up next, got a text from Chi-Town Raider. He said, Q, I hope they get it right this time. I'm so tired of the drama. I missed the Coliseum years where all you see in the stands was black and the nation just having a good time. Been a fan since the 60s, and the last 20 years, nothing but disappointment. Thanks again, my boy Q. I'm glad that you're rocking with us here. And that's Chi-Town Raider. Thanks so much for the text. I appreciate you. And that's the biggest key, man. You hit it on the head. The Raiders have had way too many coaches in the last 20-plus years. Way too many coaches, right? I mean, even just the time that I've been here in Las Vegas, way too many coaches. They've got to get this right. Right now, they're the laughingstock of the league because they change coaches like I changed my draws, right? It's a consistent rotating door, and they cannot have that. And on top of that, not only do they have to get this coaching search right, they've got to get the right coach. They've got to find a way to turn this into a winner, right? Again, you mentioned the stadium and not seeing all the silver and black there. If the Raiders start winning consistently, Raider Nation will be packing out Allegiant Stadium. Now, there's got to be some stars in there for people to get excited about as well, but people get excited about winning, right? Winning is something. It's a thing, right? And especially in Las Vegas, the thing I've learned as I've been here since 2021, where there's winning, people will follow. When they don't win, they will not follow. There's way too many things to do. I've been saying that since the minute I touched down here in Las Vegas in the 702. There's way too many things to do here than go and watch a team lose consistently and spend your hard-earned money. It's just that simple. They will find something else to do. UNLV, as soon as they started winning on the football field, guess what? Allegiant Stadium was packed. 45,000 plus people. They couldn't give away tickets at one point. All of a sudden, Barry Odom comes in, turns the program around, and the place is packed out. They're opening up the upper deck like it's fantastic. That's the same thing that the Raiders can have, but they've got to find ways to win. It's just that simple. So thanks so much for that text. Great to hear from you. I definitely appreciate you. Let's see. Got a call from Sean from San Diego. It's a quick one. He's calling to talk about Pete Carroll as a potential head coach and how long it might take for him to get things turned around. Here's Sean from San Diego.
Hey, Q. Sean from San Diego. Just had a quick kind of question or what you thought, because I know you were talking about how it's going to take some time for this team to get back to where we want it, to be competitive. But I remember you saying that Pete Carroll's 72. I was just kind of curious what your opinion was on his age and how much time this team potentially needs to get back to where we want it, to being competitive and winning football games.
Sean, thanks so much for the call. Appreciate you, and great question, right? I mean, I think that Pete Carroll can start to lay the foundation right away because he's been there, done that. He knows what it looks like. He can start turning that culture around, but I honestly believe for this Raiders team to be competitive in the AFC West, I think they're about 2 years away. 2 drafts, right? And I kind of look at the blueprint that the Broncos have put out there, where Sean Payton didn't do very well his first year when he had Russell Wilson there, but they stuck with it. They got rid of some of the extra baggage. They got rid of some of the guys with big names and big salaries that weren't holding up their end of the bargain. Obviously took the massive dead cap hit when it came to Russell Wilson, but they finally got their guys. They got in place, got the guys that they need, and boom, they win 10 games. Now, you could say they didn't beat anybody that was, above 500 or anyone that was a really good team. That's fine, but they still won 10 games, and they still made it to the playoffs in year 2 and year 1 with Bo Nix. So if you kind of follow that blueprint, I think that's the reality of what Pete Carroll can do. And as long as he can last for about 5 years as the head coach, the thing that I feel like he also could do is kind of put a plan in place where the organization is in a much better place when he decides to leave than when he found it. So it makes the transition that much smoother. So thanks so much for the call. Definitely appreciate you. Up next, got a text from Lone Star Raider out of San Antonio. Said, what it do, Q? Lone Star Raider here out of San Antonio. I have to admit, I was upset that the Raiders fired Telesco. He had one of our best drafts in years. However, for the first time in a long time, I believe the Raiders have a plan, and I believe Ben Johnson will be the next head coach. I also wanted to mention Jed Hughes. After doing some research, apparently he helped other teams hire head coaches like Andy Reid to the Chiefs, Bruce Arians to the Bucks, and Pete Carroll to the Seahawks. What a smart move by Mark. Sorry for the long text. Lone Star Raider out. Thank you so much for that text. I do appreciate you. And it wasn't very long. But yeah, Jed Hughes, that's a big deal, right? That's a big deal that they're hiring a firm to actually help conduct the search. And again, that goes back to what I was saying earlier, that they're not leaving any stone unturned, right? They have all these different guys from Ben Johnson to Aaron Glenn to Steve Spagnuolo to Pete Carroll to Robert Saleh later on, Vance Joseph. They reached out to try to get an interview with Todd Monken. Like, they are going through the process, whereas the Cowboys are just now starting with their process. They're not really getting things cooking because they took so long to make a decision on what they were going to do with their head coach, Mike McCarthy. So now they're in a kind of a tough position. The Raiders didn't do that. They just seem like they're doing things correctly. Now, what does that mean in the long run? They've still got to hire the right guys. They still got to go out there and execute. They still got to go win games. Like that's all part of it. But it seems like for the first time in a long time, the Raiders have a plan and a direction that they're going in their search for their next GM and their next head coach. Thanks so much for that. I do appreciate you. Up next, got a call from Jacob in Hanford. He's calling to talk about Deion Sanders, that situation when it comes to if he doesn't have interest in the Raiders. Here's Jacob in Hanford.
What's up, Q? This is Jacob from Hanford. I'm calling because I hear you talking about the Deion Sanders situation where, who was it, Bonsignor? No, it was Vic Taper. He was saying, that apparently the Raiders have zero interest in Deion Sanders, even though Bonsignor the day before says Deion is incredibly interested in the job. And I want to know, how do you guys get that kind of information, and how do you guys verify it? Is it like, are you trusting Vic's report? Are you trusting that Vic has a trustworthy source? Or are you talking to guys in the building and you know for sure, like, that's verified true? Because I see some of those stories and I just don't know what to believe sometimes. Like, there's all these reports and there are conflicting reports sometimes. So how do we say which one's right or wrong? All right, Q, I appreciate your time, man. You take it easy. Go Raiders.
Jacob, thanks for the call. Appreciate you. And look, that's a really good question that you ask. And I could just tell you, for me, I'll never bring anything to the show. And I want to repeat this. I will never bring anything to the show that I cannot or have not already confirmed, unless I say this is just a report and I have not confirmed this. Like if there's just a rumor, I'll say, hey, rumors are out there right now, or reports are saying, and I'll say who the report's from, and I'll say, but that's not confirmed. I have not confirmed that. When it comes to Deion and his interest in the Raiders, I know 100% that was real. I know that there were people that were in the building with the Raiders that were answering the phone call from Deion's people. Like, I know that for a fact. He was reaching out. He wasn't physically. His people were reaching out, engaging the Raiders' interest. And I'm sure they're doing the same thing with the Dallas Cowboys now that is an opening. And, of course, he's got a hell of a relationship with Jerry Jones as well. So, me and Vinny were talking to the same people. Me and Vinny were all on the same page. And so, Vic and Tashawn went and talked to their people, whoever they are, and I can't speak for them. I don't know. But they spoke to their people and got confirmed that the Raiders don't have any interest in Deion, which is basically what Vinny said as well. Only thing he said is that that Deion has interested in the Raiders, right? Is very interested in the Raiders head coaching job, which he is. Well, he was at least, but he did not say that the Raiders had interest in him, which is funny because a lot of people got all up in arms thinking, oh my gosh, Vinny's saying that the Raiders are trying to hire him. No, just that he had interest in them. I have an interest in a lot of things. Don't mean that a lot of things have interest in me, right? So that's kind of it, but I'm glad. It's a great question that you asked. It's a very valid question. Again, for me, because I'm not an insider, I'm not a guy that has sources and all that other stuff. When someone tells me something in confidence or someone texts me something in confidence, I'll bring it to the table and I'll say, hey, this is confirmed, right? I won't say who it's confirmed by just out of respect for that person. I don't need to do that, but I'll let you know. And if it's not confirmed, if it's just a rumor or report, I'll say, this is unconfirmed, but this is what's out there right now. And you'll probably hear it. You'll probably see it, this, that, and the other. That's just how I roll. Now, other guys do different things because they actually have sources, but sources know not to tell me anything because I'm a radio guy and I talk and I'm on different platforms and I'll let it out. You can't tell me nothing. My guy, Steven Simcox, back in Central Texas when I was at ESPN Central Texas, he was my co-host on Unnecessary Roughness, our original show. It was me, him, and Craig Smoke. And he was going to propose to his girlfriend at the time over the weekend. And so he did. And then on Monday he came back and she had said yes, of course. And so that was his fiance. So on the air, Craig said, hey, congratulations on getting engaged. He's like, oh, thanks, man. Thanks. I'm glad everything worked out. And I go, wait, hold on. How come you didn't tell me that this was happening? And he's like, Q, if I had told you, what would you have said? I said, I don't know. He's like, would you have talked about it on the radio? I was like, yeah, of course. He's all, that's exactly why I didn't say anything. Because you would have said something on the radio about it. She would have heard it, and then it wouldn't have been a surprise. So I tell you that story to tell you that people don't tell me things like that because they know that I'm going to go and tell it. I'll tell it on the podcast. I'll tell it on the radio show. I'll tell it somewhere, right? Hell, I have the Raiders hitting me. I'd be like, hey, what'd you say of this? Or what'd you say of that? I'm like, no, hold on. That got twisted. Someone twisted that up. So there you go. That's my story. I'm sticking to it. But anyway, thanks so much for the call, Jacob. I do appreciate you. That's all I got time for on today's show. I got a text from Steve 2.0, Caden in Reno. Also got a text from Jack Rader in Connecticut. We'll get that all coming up on tomorrow's show. Plus, we'll continue on, right? The coaching search rolls on. The GM search rolls on. I'm sure more news and notes will be rolling out, and we'll be right here to roll with it because that's how we get down. So until tomorrow, Raider Nation, take care of yourself, take care of your family, love on your family. Most importantly, as always, just win, baby.